Behind a locked door at Buckingham Palace, according to people familiar with the matter, King Charles reportedly placed his signature on a document that could quietly redraw the future of the monarchy. There was no ceremony, no statement, no cameras, only a pen, a sealed folder, and allegedly a decision about Prince William that insiders say had waited long enough. Before we get into what this really means, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. Sources suggest senior aides were summoned into a restricted room at the palace, phones collected at the door, told only that the matter concerned the future king. Charles reportedly arrived carrying a folder marked for sovereign access only, paperwork meant strictly for the monarch, and the narrow circle of advisors cleared to see it. William, notably, was not present. Inside, according to insider accounts, sat what's being called a continuity outline, a plan preparing William to take on expanded duties should sudden circumstances ever demand it. Not a transfer of the crown, sources are careful to stress, but a safeguard. Still, one aide reportedly described it as far from symbolic. Charles is said to have hesitated over the page, weighing the stability the plan promised against the weight it would place on his eldest son. Then, allegedly, he signed his name. Miles away, William received an unexplained message asking him to return to Windsor immediately. Catherine reportedly noticed the change in his face before he spoke a word. "Something's happened," he told her quietly, folding the message before leaving with no answers of his own. According to those familiar with the file, it mapped out a private schedule which briefings, state papers, and responsibilities would begin moving toward the future king, and roughly when. State papers, for context, are official government documents routed to the sovereign for review. Only a small handful of people were said to have seen the full timetable. One senior courtier, according to a leaked internal account, reportedly warned a colleague that this wasn't ceremonial language, it was a mechanism already quietly in motion. As William's car neared Windsor, he reportedly had no way of knowing whether his father had simply secured his future or had run out of time to explain it properly. Either way, understanding the plan meant first facing the man who had written it. To the public, William has always appeared as the patient heir, waiting several steps behind his father. Inside the family, sources suggest the reality carries far more weight. Every step that brings the prince closer to the throne also brings him closer to the moment his father can no longer hold it. William reportedly entered a private sitting room at Windsor and stopped almost immediately. Charles was said to be standing near the fireplace rather than seated behind his desk, a small detail that apparently told his son this wasn't an ordinary conversation. According to those close to the king, Charles chose his words with care, telling his son that preparation wasn't a prediction of tragedy, only protection, though his voice, sources say, faltered on the final word. The hesitation reportedly made the reassurance feel incomplete. William is said to have opened the folder to find only the first pages. Several annexes remained sealed, including one detailing conditions under which the future king could receive expanded authority ahead of becoming sovereign. An annex, simply put, is an additional section containing instructions considered too sensitive for the main document. Catherine reportedly found him later, still and unmoving, the folder closed beside him. She didn't press him, she waited. He eventually admitted quietly that he wasn't afraid of becoming king. He was afraid of everything that had to happen first. To understand why Charles acted when he did, sources point back to a single incident that nearly unraveled behind the scenes weeks earlier. To the watching public, it looked composed and dignified. Inside the household, insiders describe a missing briefing and several minutes of confusion that reportedly terrified the king. During a major Commonwealth service, an urgent state communication is said to have arrived while Charles was temporarily unreachable. Officials needed an answer immediately, but no signed authority allowed William to read the message or respond on the crown's behalf. According to accounts from those present, William stood in a private antechamber while aides argued beyond the door, the heir to the throne treated in that moment as little more than a spectator. The delay reportedly lasted 11 minutes. When Charles returned and learned what had happened, he is said to have dismissed the room, remained silent, and then apologized to his son. That evening, sources claim he summoned constitutional advisors and demanded a mechanism be drafted that could prevent the same gap from ever opening again, something with real authority behind it, not cautious language. William would eventually learn what had triggered the declaration. According to those familiar with his reaction, gratitude wasn't the first thing he felt. In a locked room at Windsor with no aides or family present, sources say William placed the declaration on the table between them and asked his father directly whether he'd signed it because the institution needed him or because Charles feared he might not be able to continue. The king reportedly insisted that sovereigns couldn't wait for a crisis to protect the line of succession. William is said to have answered that fathers shouldn't make choices that permanently reshape their son's life without including him. According to insiders, Charles finally admitted the truth behind it, that the 11 minutes at Westminster had frightened him more than he'd let anyone see. Every royal decision may appear to begin with the sovereign, but sources describe a much less visible hand shaping this particular one. Princess Anne, according to insider accounts, had reportedly studied the Westminster incident closely and, alongside senior constitutional advisors, pushed Charles toward a stronger version of the plan than he'd initially intended. She is said to have told her brother quite plainly that protecting William from fear wasn't the same as preparing him properly, and that affection could become dangerous if it kept the heir from receiving what he genuinely needed. Charles reportedly asked whether she doubted his judgment as a father. Anne, sources say, didn't raise her voice. She simply placed the timeline of the delay back in front of him. Camilla, according to those close to the family, found Charles alone with that same timeline later and asked the harder question herself: was he preparing William for the crown or quietly preparing himself to release it? The declaration was never formally announced, yet insiders say the palace began behaving as though it had been. William reportedly began receiving briefing material once reserved only for the sovereign. Meetings once built entirely around Charles's schedule were said to shift quietly around his son's. No crown had changed hands, but according to sources, everyone inside the household could feel the balance of authority moving. Catherine reportedly noticed how the new access changed him, William coming home late with a locked case of confidential papers, describing decisions capable of affecting millions of lives, and admitting he hadn't expected the sheer loneliness that came with it. Before an internal exercise testing whether the new plan could function during an actual emergency, William is said to have asked his father for one thing: a private walk. No aides, no folders, no titles between them. According to those familiar with the conversation, William asked what Charles had felt when his own mother began preparing him for kingship. Charles reportedly admitted, for the first time aloud, that guilt had followed every lesson, that imagining a future which required his mother's absence had always felt like a quiet betrayal. William is said to have understood immediately, confessing that every new responsibility now felt tied to the possibility of losing his father too. Sources describe a rare, unguarded moment between them, Charles insisting the plan wasn't written because he expected to disappear, but because history could move without warning, and he refused to leave his son unprepared when it did. William reportedly accepted the expanded duties on one condition: that none of it should ever look like the sovereign had quietly been replaced. According to insiders, the peace between them lasted only hours. A confidential summary of the declaration is reported to have escaped palace control before any joint explanation could be prepared, and Britain reportedly woke to fragments of a story it didn't yet understand. A government source, according to reports, confirmed that William had received expanded constitutional preparation and emergency access, though officials insisted no transfer of the throne had taken place. Buckingham Palace, sources say, issued a statement describing responsible succession planning as a normal duty of the crown, though the careful wording didn't calm every corner of public reaction. One newspaper reportedly ran the headline, "The King prepares his heir," and according to accounts of that morning, opinions split almost instantly, some seeing quiet strength in the decision, others questioning why it had needed to stay secret at all. William, watching the coverage beside Catherine, is said to have grown visibly unsettled by suggestions that his father was stepping aside. She reportedly told him that denials wouldn't quiet the noise, but standing beside Charles, publicly and visibly, might. That afternoon, according to palace sources, a joint appearance was confirmed. When Charles and William finally appeared together, there was reportedly no abdication, no farewell, no surrender of the throne, only recognition. The king is said to have walked in the leading position, but with William beside him rather than several steps behind, a small but deliberate signal that the future king was being prepared openly, not concealed. According to those present, Charles paused before they stepped forward, adjusted his son's ceremonial insignia, and quietly said, "You're ready to learn what no one can learn alone." William reportedly answered, "Then we do it together." Sources close to the family say Charles no longer treated the plan as an admission of weakness after that moment, and William, for his part, is said to have accepted that the road ahead would always carry sorrow, but chose to walk it anyway, not because he wanted the crown, but because of who he'd be leading. What began behind a locked door with a single unannounced signature ultimately became something Buckingham Palace never intended to hide for long. Not a secret, insiders suggest, but a father's quiet act of protection, and a son's first real step toward the future. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.